PBS Hawaii, home is here.
Local broadcasts of KΑKOU are made possible by the support of viewers like you. Mahalo. And by Young Brothers, providing quality service you can count on, connecting our island communities for over 120 years as the state's leading inter-island freight transportation company. They're destructive and deadly, yet it seems like there's no stopping the excess of illegal fireworks in Hawaii. Some say it's our culture and tradition, yet behind the dazzling bursts is a black market authorities have struggled to stop. What needs to change and how? Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of KAKOU, Hawaii's Town Hall, start now.
Aloha and welcome to KAKOU, Hawaii's Town Hall, live from the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Multimedia Studio. I'm Yunji de Nies. Illegal aerial fireworks have become synonymous with New Year's Eve here in Hawaii. We know they're against the law. They cause fires and injuries. They distress our kupuna, pets, and veterans. And yet every year, the skies light up. But a deadly incident this past New Year's Eve may mark a turning point. This is home video that captures the explosion in ʻAiea-Manu that killed 6 people, including a 3-year-old boy, and injured about 20 others. There's no recorded audio, but we'll let the video speak for itself. Now, that same night, a 20-year-old man was also killed in a fireworks blast in Kalihi. When the smoke cleared in ʻAiea-Manu, authorities also confiscated 500 pounds of unused illegal fireworks from the scene. That's separate from the explosions that you're seeing on your screen right now. So far, a dozen people have been arrested. No one has been charged. Hawaii law prohibits aerial fireworks without a permit. The penalties include fines and possible jail time. But despite the ban, these explosives continue to flood into our state. So why is it so hard to stop them? KAKOU means all of us, as in we are all in this together. And given just how close so many of us live to one another, whether it's you lighting them or your neighbor, these fireworks pose a significant danger to our community. We want to hear from you in our discussion tonight. You can email or call in your questions. We're also streaming live at pbshawaii.org and on our YouTube page. In our town hall, we have law enforcement, first responders, policymakers, and concerned community members. So let's begin. And before we get into that policy discussion, let's get a sense of what it was like in that scene, the scene that you just saw in that video. Going first to Dr. Jim Ireland, who is the chief of Honolulu's Emergency Medical Services Department. Dr. Ireland, you were on scene. You just responded that night. Can you tell us about what you saw?
You know, when I watched the video that you just showed, it's amazing anybody survived. And that was just so horrendous. But every New Year's for EMS is busy in Hawaii and on Oahu. We usually get anywhere from 3 to 8 people who lose fingers or hands, and often, most years, at least one death, and people who were killed by illegal aerials, hit in the face, hit in the head. But this was above and beyond that, in addition to the one fatality you mentioned. It was so massive. When the ambulances got there, they found about 21 critically injured patients. And that's what makes this even so unusual, is so many people were critical, in addition to 2 people who had passed away already at the scene. It looked like a bomb had gone off. People's clothing was burned off. Most of them had their skin burned off. It was just really a horrific, horrific scene. And again, people who are in the police department, in EMS, in the fire department, see tragic things and they see horrible injuries, but to have this many was so unusual. And one of the things that made that night go as smooth as it could and save as many lives as could be saved was just the working relationship between EMS, the fire department, the police department, and the federal fire department. Everybody showed up there, probably over 100 first responders, and did what they needed to do, whether it was rescuing people, moving people, getting them the ambulances, treating them, to save as many lives as possible so we could then hand them off to the hospitals to continue their care.
Thank you for that. Let's talk now to someone who works for the hospitals. Dr. Daniel Cheng is an emergency room physician at the Queens Medical Center. You know, 6 of those injuries were sent to the Arizona Burn Center in Phoenix for treatments for those burns because they were so severe. I know that you were involved with coordinating a lot of the care. Just can you tell us about what those injuries are like?
Yeah, as Dr. Island mentioned, when you have fireworks injuries like this that we see on an annual basis during the New Year's holidays, burns end up being a big part of the care. For these particular individuals that were transferred to Arizona, the just sheer extent of burns, and not just from our facility, but other facilities on the island, there's a general formula, which is the percent of burns equals the rate of mortality of death. And on excess of 90% were multiple of these patients. And I just have to really recognize Dr. Island, his team, Chief Horikawa, Chief Hwang, their team. The survival rate is all about resuscitation in that first hour. And as Dr. Island mentioned to me earlier, I mean, the response was immediate and was instant. And that really is what saved these people's lives. More of them should have probably passed away, but I think they've survived mostly because of the response.
Wow. Okay. Well, ahead of tonight, we spoke to people across Honolulu. One of them was very open about just how much he enjoys setting off what he calls bombs.
I'm all for it, I blow it up every year.
What do you enjoy about it?
Like on high. Just a big explosion. I mean, if it's 3-inch, 4-inch, 5-inch, this bomb is crazy. The thing echoed the whole valley. It's a high for me.
Are you worried that it's dangerous?
It is. We gotta be responsible when you set them off. Because plenty of these guys, they're doing them all the wrong way. That's why they get hurt. My dad taught us to blow it in our hand. If we cannot do that, then you cannot touch them. Cannot touch them. You gotta expect that.
Yeah. And what about your grandkids? Do you let your grandkids do it?
Yes, I do.
Not worried?
This past year, he was only 5. I let him go. We let them all go. They're going to have to learn the hard way.
Well, whether you agree with Lee or not, we appreciate his honesty. Pao-Chi Hwang is a battalion chief at the Honolulu Fire Department. Chief, clearly by the volume of fireworks that we see in community, there are a lot of people who feel the same way that gentleman does, even if they might not tell it to a television station. When you hear what he expressed there, a 5-year-old engaging with these kinds of materials, what goes through your mind?
Well, the fire department, at the forefront of everything we do is safety, so it just utterly scares me. I too have childhood memories of fireworks and celebrations. I just feel that there is a safe way, legal way to do it, and the fire department does provide a safe and legal way to go about enjoying fireworks for celebrations, cultural events. We're there to support the community. The issue is illegal fireworks. So the things that he was speaking of are typically handled by professionals. They get licenses, permits from the fire department, they follow the fire code. There's controls and regulations in place to make sure those things are done safely. Things like if they're going to display those large bombs, as he called them, we will actually make sure that people who are doing it have a certificate of fitness from the state, and so that they're trained to handle the explosives. So it would make sense. We would actually go out to the display site and do fire code inspections to make sure the surroundings are cordoned off. They have the fire extinguishers, everything's done correctly. We also go to the storage site. We go as far as going to see where they store, make sure they follow the fire code. So when the citizens decide to take these professional grade fireworks, they bypass all these safety issues. And by doing that, a result of that would be things like the past New Year's Eve tragedy, because they totally bypass our city and county rules and regulations. So it makes me sad.
Yeah, and so the question really is, why are so many people willing to take that risk? When we ask people out in our community why they think fireworks are so popular, we heard the words culture and tradition again and again.
It's the culture, probably, the culture of these people that, they were born and raised, and it's like following the tradition, but in a way that I think they have to be responsible about it. Yeah.
It is Hawaii. It's definitely a part of our culture, I'd say, because it's not like this aerial fireworks is a new thing for us. We've been trying to stop it for years. It's been all over the news for how long now? So, you know, and it's just getting worse. It got worse in terms of how much usage there is, but we can't really stop it unless we stop it at the ports.
Culture and tradition. Joni Kamiya recently wrote an opinion piece about that argument. Joni, what are your thoughts? Should we accept this as just a part of what Hawaii is?
So after this whole incident where I heard a lot of, leaders saying we have to be sensitive about how we talk about this culture and tradition, of Hawaii, and I'm thinking, okay, as a kid, our culture was to blow the red firecrackers. We'd blow the little ones. We did sparklers. We never once did aerials or anything like that, and we always did it at the same time, at midnight, played by the rules, because it was a community. We didn't blow red lines of firecrackers at different times. That was not the culture. Chinese style, Asian style, we never did that. So when they start using this culture and tradition thing, I'm like, do they really understand our cultural practice and why we did it? We did it because we wanted to chase away evil spirits. We do it at a certain time of year for that reason. And to me, when people keep using this, I feel like they're totally disrespecting and they've lost that culture and tradition and the values that we had as a community together.
Mm-hmm. I want to key in also to something that gentleman shared at the end there, and that was this idea that we need to stop it at the ports. Mike Lambert is the director of the Department of Law Enforcement, which is responsible for the Illegal Fireworks Task Force. Director Lambert, can we stop it at the ports?
Yeah, definitely. It's something that just has to be given attention. So I think a lot of times whenever law enforcement prioritizes, it is based on the sentiment of the community. So for most of those callers or most of those people that you're interviewing, that's the sentiment. Right? So in other words, typically prior to the ʻAiea-Pearl tragedy, right, we're focusing more on drugs, guns. And I think now that there's a shift in perception and priority, we're definitely going to be more involved at the port. And that's where, I guess, bulk comes in, but it also comes in through the Postal Service. So the good thing is that it does have to come in. The hard thing is how do we filter through those thousands of containers without impeding commerce. So that's the balance we're going to have to find. I was able to do a news or press release of sorts to kind of share that we are adding additional technology in regards to AI to help us with this issue. And I'm confident that in the next 12 months, we're going to start to see some larger seizures that will occur at the port.
Okay. Well, several people we spoke with say they are frustrated with the enforcement of laws that we already have. Let's take a look.
Well, I'd like to see them more strictly enforced if possible, but that's very difficult to do because we're down with police officers. We don't have enough police officers right now.
It's hard because it's not only a few people doing it. It's almost everybody is doing it. They probably have to arrest everybody here in town.
Number one, the police are not citing as much as they could and should, and the prosecutors are not prosecuting as much as they could or should.
Okay, so let's hear from the police and then someone from the prosecutor's office. Keith Horikawa is the deputy police chief with the Honolulu Police Department. Chief, what are some of the challenges that you face in citing people and arresting folks for this illegal activity?
Right, so I think one of the big challenges, of course, is especially on New Year's Eve, the day of execution, so to speak, there's just a sheer volume of fireworks that are just being, just being lit up, which typically can, overwhelm the typical patrol officers' capability to really address each one. So that becomes a challenge as well. But even though, and I'm sure the prosecutor will chime in, but even with the ones that we do cite and arrest, sometimes the challenges in court, becomes a challenge as far as getting prosecutions and setting that deterrent down. But as far as our ability to investigate, and we do, we patrol officers do try to get out there and respond to each case that at least is reported or they can observe, but again, just the sheer volume does overwhelm our capabilities sometimes.
Yeah, well, let's hear also from the prosecutors now. Mark Yuen is a division chief with the Honolulu Prosecutor's Office. How difficult is it to prosecute these cases?
Well, of course, there's not very many of these kind of cases, right? So I think Chief Horikawa hit it right on the head that it's so hard. I mean, you saw the video you saw all those fireworks going on in the sky, and it's just blowing up everywhere. There's only so many patrol officers. Let's say they go to one scene, then they need backup, and there's fireworks going off everywhere else. Like, what do you do in that situation, right? So it's difficult just to be able to investigate that. And once it is investigated, once it does get to our office, and like I said, we don't get too many of them, then we have the issue of, okay, we need witnesses, we need evidence, we need to have the evidence tested. There are definitions that we have to prove, there are elements that we have to prove, and we have to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. And beyond a reasonable doubt, people think, oh, what is that? It's a very high standard that we have. And in order for us to even charge a case, that's our standard. I know for most jurisdictions, it's probable cause. For us, we go beyond a reasonable doubt. So even for that, it's hard, it's really difficult to prove these cases if you don't have witnesses, if you don't have foundation. Let's say there's a video, I still need foundation to prove the video. And as far as testing, we gotta have that tested. And so those are the challenges that we have. There are other challenges as well, and I think Representative Matayoshi will get into that later on. But we have some issues with the definitions of aerial devices and of the display fireworks. It's a very convoluted definition, and if you just read it, you'll be just frustrated. You'll be just like, wow, what is this, right? And so we have to prove those things. And a definition is something that requires an expert to testify to.
Let's say you do get someone, you get that evidence turned over, all of the sort of the list that you were describing. What typically is the penalty for engaging with this? Okay, so the best way to look at it, so right now we're talking about aerials and display, and just to decipher between the two, aerials is the small kind, display is the big ones, right? So for those, it's the same penalties. So you have, for the small guy, you have the user, like the guy that was on TV. For the big guy, those are the dealers, the importers, and those guys. For the importers, it's a C felony, which is 5 years, if they don't have a license and they bring it in, or if they sell it to somebody who doesn't have a permit. Currently, that's a C felony. For the users, for the small guys, if they have 25 pounds or more that they're igniting, or if you're in possession of, that's a C felony as well. But if it's less than 25 pounds, it's a misdemeanor. Okay. You referenced Representative Matayoshi, so we want to go to him now. Representative Scot Matayoshi is one of the voices that is calling for a change in the law. Tell us about what you've proposed this legislative session.
Well, we have a couple of bills going through, but I think the most important one is, like Mark said, adjusting the definition of fireworks or aerial devices. Right now, aerial devices, they need to actually recover the casing, they need to measure it, they need to determine if a certain amount of explosives were in there, and it's hard to prove that when you have an exploded device. We're trying to change it to any kind of device that propels itself above 12 feet, so very easy to prove. We're also creating 2 new levels, both one higher and one lower. The lower one is for the small guys. For anyone with 5 pounds or less of fireworks, it's a straight fine that doesn't require the strict burden of proof that the prosecutors normally have to prove. And the second one is a higher penalty, 50 pounds or more, like was the case in the tragedy from last New Year's Eve. And that's going to be more of a felony B, or if it causes serious bodily harm, it could be as high as a felony A. Okay. What you're describing is something that the governor has also talked about, this idea of basically turning the sort of smaller level or lower level into a citation, which is, for viewers, that's sort of similar to a traffic citation, in that they have a much lower burden of proof. Hayley Cheng is an assistant public defender. Tell us a little bit about your office. My understanding is that they oppose this change. Is that right?
Well, we had some opposition to the measures that were being introduced, but as our position was consistently stated throughout the legislative session, the concern of our office was never the enforcement. We actually didn't oppose any of the proposed changes related to the definitions that you've been hearing about from the prosecutor. And we understand the need to address this community issue. Our concern, and as we've testified before multiple committees on, in addition to our written testimony, was we understand the reaction, we understand the need to do things, but our position always was, and I think that's been confirmed by the other panelists that you've already heard from, is we have laws on the books. We have felony laws that are already on the books. We have misdemeanor offenses that were already on the books, that have been on the books for years ahead of this tragedy. And so our position is that the energy should be focused on some of the things that we've also heard about, which is enforcement, whether that's at the piers or beefing up enforcement on the night of New Year's Eve, rather than trying to enhance penalties and increase prison time for charges that we are not currently utilizing. So that was the nature of our office's opposition.
I mean, given how many people are engaged with this, and that your office would be tasked then to defend those folks if they needed that, how many, I mean, what kind of a workload would that add for you, do you think?
And that is something that I think we're going to be seeing, and I think we do like the idea, as everybody's talking about the citations. It's an easy way, or easier way to enforce, penalize, hold people accountable. But when we are increasing penalties, for example, you've heard something referenced as a Class A or a felony. An A felony requires a mandatory open 20-year term of incarceration. So if people get charged with something that requires a mandatory 20-year term of incarceration, you can imagine they're not going to be incentivized to take responsibility, and they're going to want to challenge the charge that they're being accused of. Which is everybody's right, no matter what the penalty is. So we are sort of bracing and waiting to see what the impact of the proposed legislation would be. But again, it was never a matter of being oppositional to the enforcement or the prosecution of these types of cases. It was just, I think our office had a different position on what tactics should be taken to address the root cause.
I want to give you an opportunity, Representative Matayoshi, just to respond to that, and then I'd love to go to Val Okimoto from the City Council. What are your thoughts on what she just shared?
Yeah, to be clear, I think that the bill is structured in such a way that the penalties escalate. So it's a lower penalty, but if someone is injured in the course of you setting off the fireworks, it's a higher penalty. If the injury is serious or results in a death, then it's much more serious. And in terms of storage of fireworks, that's exactly what happened in the recent tragedy. You're basically living next to someone who you don't know if they have a bomb in their house that could hurt you, that could burn out the neighborhood, that could hurt you, your family, your kids. So I do think that we need a higher level of penalty for people who are willing to endanger the lives of the community members, endanger the lives of their neighbors. And if that unfortunately comes to fruition and they do seriously injure someone, I think we do need a higher standard for which to charge them.
There's also the role of the City and County of Honolulu. We talked about what the state is doing. Let's go now to Val Okimoto, who is a council member representing District 8, which covers Central Oahu. Council member, you are the chair for the Public Safety Committee for the City and County. Tell us a little bit about if you think that the city should enhance some penalties or what you think the role should be there.
I want to first of all just thank PBS for allowing us this forum to discuss this. And I do want to give a really special shout out to our first responders, because as you shared in that first video and has been shared this evening, you know, the efforts that go out from our first responders is really, we love and honor that and respect that. But on the city level, we have a unique situation here in the city because we have certain laws that are in place and we have to work in collaboration with the state. I'm really thankful that actually Director Lambert came. Prior to being director, he was a major in the police department, and HPD came. And at that time where they did an info briefing, because we have to understand what can we do. Our scope right now in the city is limited to certain things, and we have to align. We're excited to see that the state is moving on certain legislation. Here in Oahu, we have to make sure that the city, what are we doing to collaborate, to have our rules, our ordinances align with the state as well. And I did hear in the info briefing that Director Lambert shared, definitions is a big concern, and that we've heard it tonight with our prosecuting and public defender, that's something that's really hard, because our city law enforcement is a department that is then responsible to go and enforce what happens after incidents happen. So on the city side right now, we had a bill last year, Bill 22, which maybe I'll talk about later, to talk about legalizing certain commercial fireworks to kind of detract from and address the issue of these illegal fireworks that are going off. But Bill 7 right now is still in the City Council. That is a bill that Esther Kia-Aina and I have signed on together, and that's really to try and align our city ordinances and the penalties and definitions with what the state is doing. That will really help, I think, with the law enforcement. And I know that Director Lambert is really trying to work, while in this capacity, work with us, because right now what we have in place is not working. That's, I think, the take I have. Whatever we have in place, there's laws already there, but we are not able to control it. And so we had incidents like what happened on New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
You know, Yunji, one other thing I think just to keep in mind is when you think about New Year's Eve, and anybody who works in the fire, police, or EMS knows this, there's a lot going on that night because there's parties, people are drinking, people unfortunately are fighting, there's medical calls for the smoke. So the officers are involved with the fire department. If they go on a fire, they have to control traffic. They go to all the car accidents, obviously they go to the fights. So I think anything we can do to make the officer's job easy as far as the enforcement or proving the case, because again, that night is so busy. It's really probably the busiest night of the year for anybody in fire, police, and EMS.
I want to go to Director Lambert with a question. We have some great questions coming in from our audience, so keep them coming. Thank you so much. This one's from Jill, who's watching us on YouTube tonight. I've heard that there is not enough manpower to stop fireworks at the port. Is that true? Do you have the resources that you need, given that 90% of our food is shipped in, and all the other paper products and all the clothes we get from wherever, retailers, everything is coming through that port. How on earth could you find these fireworks with what you have right now?
Right, so then that's the issue, right? And I think that goes for law enforcement across all issues, is that there's just not enough human capital to tackle all of these issues. And that's why the Department of Law Enforcement is making huge tech investments to help us, right? And so it's one of those things where we acknowledge that we don't have the bodies. So it's about being strategic and utilizing what I call the future of law enforcement is a lot, large amounts, and again, to elected officials to help support those investments. So I do believe that if we're strategic, I do believe with the right investments that we can make it happen with the bodies that we do have in regards to law enforcement. And again, it's going to be a huge partnership with each county. I'm grateful to have a great relationship with the Honolulu Police Department. And I'm going to go in after session, making sure that I have those same relationships on each county, because it's going to be a collaboration between literally, city, state, and federal. But really what's going to make the difference is what we invest in regards to our AI technology, the screening, cameras, all of the above technology that exists that I don't feel that we have implemented or utilized in a way that makes a difference yet.
Well, they're stopping it at the source, is what you're talking about, and there's also changing the mindset, right? We heard from Lee earlier tonight, very open about how exciting and how he finds it delightful to do that, and we have some comments here. Joni, I'd love for you to respond to what these folks are saying. Shannon from Hawaiʻi Kai says, I think the tradition for fireworks is limited to the red firecrackers, not these massive aerials. Those cross a line. Those are not part of any cultures here. But someone writing in on Instagram watching tonight says the popping of fireworks on New Year's is to rid bad energy of ending the year, and so the new year begins with good energy. It's a way to cleanse the energy. If you were raised in Hawaii, you are likely to be aware of the cultural suppression of the Hawaiian people have gone through. Fireworks ban is no different. It would be the equivalent to banning Native Americans from burning sage to cleanse energy. Keep fireworks legal, educate, and empower the public to use them safely. What are your thoughts?
So, honestly, we're talking a lot about laws and enforcement and all that kinds of things, and we're all really limited with resources. And the power, I think, if we really want change, has to come through community building already. To really understand, can I trust my neighbor to keep me safe? Like this year, my dad's and neighbors, we're shooting fireworks over our house, over our tractors, over our farm. We have fuel, we have new equipment. We don't want that happening, and so do we call the police and get busy and they might not be able to come? And we know those neighbors. So this year, my son picked up all the debris, was flying all over the shed, all over the house. I said, we either can sit here for 4 hours and let them shoot it all over our house, or we just walk up to them. And I said, that's it. I said, if they keep shooting those big things, because there was big cardboard pieces, and we walked up to them and said, hey, you want to shoot your fireworks? Shoot it your way, but don't shoot it our way. Because neighbors, what happened to neighbors respecting neighbors? What happened to being a community where we take care of each other and we are respectful of each other's property? Where is that? All the police presence, everything that we can try to do on a law basis, but if the community still doesn't understand and respect each other, we're gonna continue to be at a losing battle. And haven't we learned from the Maui fires what destruction fire can do? And yet we're doing that right now. That is so upsetting to me. I work in home health. My clients are disabled. The neighbor is shooting fireworks right over their house. How are they going to get out of their house? Do you have no consideration or aloha for our neighbors? That is what we're asking for. You know, that is why I wrote that blog, because Hawaii used to take care of each other. You know, people kind of knew each other. We've lost that. And I think somehow along the line, we need to rebuild that. You know, so for me as a community volunteer, I work full time. But I decided to organize that Kāneʻohe Fun Fair. Even though I busted my butt doing it, it brought people together. And we know each other. We start to develop relationships. And I feel like that's how we're going to support our law enforcement. That's how we're going to support our neighbors, our communities. We have to talk at a bigger picture. And I think the more we can rebuild those things, we can get people to understand. We can find common ground and have shared values about valuing each other.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really interesting point also about just the danger to the surrounding community. We're talking a lot about injuries tonight and of course fatalities, but there's also the risk to homes and to property, what you're talking about. Chief Hwang, could you talk about that a little bit, about, you know, if an aerial or some of this debris goes onto a roof, what kind of consequences you can see in terms of just the property damage and the fire danger? Absolutely.
I really appreciated your comments. That was great. So I really, one of my personal stories when I was very young, talk about childhood memories of fireworks, cultural celebrations. One of my memories was actually a aerial going off in the air, landing on one of my friend's house, lit the roof on fire, and as the Boy Scout troop came to help them recover their personal belongings and finding pictures, and the tears I saw in the family's eyes really struck me to this day. So now the fireworks that we're talking about, these illegal aerials and large mortar shells that go up, just the damage that we can see is just tremendous. I cannot stress hard enough, the firefighters that went to that call on New Year's Eve are my friends. They're my brothers, and I was at that station, and they describe it as a war zone. And just imagine to yourself that treating patient to patient right next to unexploded ordnance, the kind of fear and the devastation that you're seeing is just amazing. You see the windows collapse, and there's you don't know if the next one's going to go off right in your face. So I appreciate the people's opinions about how they would like to celebrate, but I'd just like to emphasize the dangers they're putting not only to their neighbors, themselves, their families, also the first responder is at risk also. So as a firefighter, it puts fear in my heart for my brothers.
Yeah, Dr. Ireland, what has been the impact on the people that work with you, the ones who responded that night? I know you were on scene, and I would imagine that it's a very traumatic experience to be a first responder in that circumstance.
Right, and they all did just so well. The paramedics, Sharmalina was our triage officer up there, Jeff Zuckernick, our incident commander under the scene battalion chief, who was the overall incident commander. We've talked about it afterwards and had some debriefings, and it's tough. And again, people who do this for a living in EMS and also police and fire see tragedies, but that was just so amplified, and there were so many people so badly injured. It really was momentarily overwhelming, but they fell back on their training, they fell back on the camaraderie with the other first responders, and again, just everybody, the police did what they needed to do and carried bodies out, and the firefighters did rescue, and they carried bodies out. One of the girls they brought out, it was actually 4 firefighters that brought her out, and she wasn't breathing, so they were using what we call bag valve mask to breathe for her, and resuscitating people there right at the scene, triage right in the streets. The federal fire department came and brought extra ambulances, and so there were enough resources there, but momentarily for everybody there, I think it was a bit overwhelming. The police shut down Salt Lake Boulevard, so that could be used to stage ambulances, maybe a few hundred yards from the actual scene. So I think everything went as well as it could have been from the first responder, the team aspect, and then the hospitals. You know, we put out an alert, our dispatch to all the hospitals that you're going to get a lot of patients. And normally, we don't send burn patients anywhere but Straub. There's no way they could handle that many patients. More than half had explosive traumatic injuries, and those usually always go to Queens or maybe Polymomie or Castles, the other trauma centers, but there's no way they could take them all. And so, you know, we put in a call to Dr. Cheng's team, like our dispatch did that and said, you guys need to get ready because this is above and beyond the normal New Year's. And maybe he can comment on more what they had to do at the hospitals. But the teams that night worked very well together. I was very proud of everybody. But there's nobody who's going to come out of something like that unaffected.
Yeah, Dr. Cheng, if you could tell us a little bit about what it was like to coordinate that response. And also, you know, we're talking about a very traumatic incident on a very large scale, but even on what we would consider a typical New Year's, you know, we do know that people often lose their lives or they are severely, permanently injured. We think of New Year's as good fun and seeing these fireworks go off, and often there's alcohol involved. Tell us about the kind of injuries you see, even from a more pedestrian case, if you will.
Yeah, I think one vein, you know, hearing some of the guests you've had in here is that if we look at trends of injuries, even 20 years ago, you know, sparkler, little burns here, is I think one of the themes that, you know, has been spoken is the lethality. The fireworks that maybe of the generations of the past are nothing like the fireworks now. The sheer, and I'm sure Deputy Lambert and Chief Hwang can speak to just actually the more of the science behind it. But you're talking about the grams, the amount of explosives in these have dramatically changed. And you can actually see that through the care that we see. So as Dr. Ireland mentioned, hands blown off routinely, eyes, a lot of aerials as they go up. You know, you can imagine you're lighting it, you're looking, short fuse, it goes right in the eye. I think one of the things, and I'll get to the actual event, but is I think education, and I think Joni touched upon it, it's so many there's so much disabling injuries that have happened over the past just decade alone, is that as one, you know, uncle over there is talking about, oh, you know, my 5-year-old kid, like, hey, putting the hand, is where's the education? Like, you know, they're getting it maybe from the home, but where's the responsibility for, where's the responsibility on the community? Is it in the schools? Where's to kind of provide some basic level of education of safety? So I think that's a topic there. But to Dr. Ireland's point, at least for that particular day, as the major trauma center, the major just hospital, biggest hospital for the state, we do routine quarterly disaster drills. And so, yeah, I couldn't be more proud of the trauma team, my emergency team, the nurses, respiratory therapists, everybody that needs to respond. So we've practiced this. The all call came in, no brainer. It was, we activated code triage, and we had roughly 20 to 30 providers down in the emergency room ready to receive not just the ones coming by ambulance, but Jim can attest to, Dr. Ireland can attest to too, is that people are going to come in the cars, and that's what they did. The ones that were the walking wounded, arm, you know, blown off, a family member can drive them in because they know the paramedics are going to be there taking care of the ones that were critically ill. Yeah, it was a challenging night, but the team, I think after 2 or 3 hours, the team had cleared out. We made sure all the people were cared for. And that's on top of, as Jim mentioned, all the injuries that are happening. People are still crashing their cars. People are still having heart attacks. People are still having appendicitis. These are all people that need life-saving care on top of the dozens or so tragedies that we had.
We think 40 people were injured that night at that Salt Lake site. We think it was about 40. 21 critical went by ambulance. 2 were deceased at the scene. But we think there were 16 to 20 more that found their way in cars to all the other ERs, because the ERs were giving us numbers after the fact way higher than what we counted in the ambulances. Councilwoman Okimoto.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo, because I agree, when the responsibility and education was shared earlier, I thought the same thing. I thought, you know, we rely on our law enforcement so heavily, and the decisions that people make on a daily basis impact law enforcement and our first responders. But at some point, we really do have to channel back into, not just with fireworks, but with other issues that are plaguing our communities right now. But definitely for this topic, what are we doing to address them education-wise, having people take responsibility? We do have laws on the books right now, like was mentioned, And as I mentioned earlier, it hasn't seemed to work. So what can we do with the prosecution side? What can we do with law enforcement? What can we do regulating what comes in? It's going to take multiple avenues. But I do want to say that I've advocated for this before, and I understand where our first responders feel the need to cut everything off. I think we have to find some kind of balance. It's interesting, and thank you for sharing that the fireworks that we have today aren't what they used to be when I was growing up. But I do miss the safe and regulated avenues that we had as when we were young. And I think the more that we get to the extreme where we ban everything, which it seems to be the case right now, people have then resorted to going to the black market or doing other avenues, spending their money, storing it, which is very dangerous. So I really would like to have some kind of discussion at some point. What can we do to find some kind of balance? And what can we do to enforce and prosecute the laws that we already have that are in place? Whatever we're doing now hasn't seemed to work, and it's just escalated.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because there are a couple of comments here that came in tonight. It says the only way to control this problem is to have a total ban on all fireworks. Nothing else will work. Another person says ban them all. Fireworks are toxic, harmful to humans, animals, and the environment. The noise is overwhelming. I don't understand why the state of Hawaii is so cruel and unfeeling. This is not a Hawaiian tradition. Representative Matayoshi, do you think that banning, a total ban, is a way that we could eventually go or should go?
I know people want a total ban. I don't think that's going to make too much of a difference. All of the illegal aerials you see, they're already illegal and people are still firing them off. I think what we need to do is be more proactive about this. Everyone who contacts my office wants us to take action. And whether that's stopping them at the ports, which I've looked into for years, dogs, x-rays. I even crawled down into a container ship once to see if we could scan containers en route to Oahu to not slow down the offloading. It's very difficult to stop them at the ports. The other idea that I've been advancing through a bill this year that's still alive is to increase sting operations for both the buyer and the seller side. Right now, it's very difficult for HPD to kind of catch them in the act. It's very difficult to gain the evidence you need to prosecute them effectively. But if we were to set up sting operations, not just for the sellers, but also for the buyers, I think it would chill the market. I think people would start to become afraid to buy these illegal fireworks because they wouldn't know, is that person I'm buying from a police officer or not? Or is that person I'm selling to a police officer? It would not only allow us to get that kind of evidence and build a case while we're doing the sting operation, but it would allow us to be proactive in stopping these fireworks from getting to the point where they're being let off to injure people.
Chief, I want to ask you about the idea of sting operations. What do you think about that tactic?
Yeah, absolutely. We do partner with the DLE, as part of the fireworks task force, and we did under the previous director last year, we did do several undercover sting type of operations, as well as I think about between 8 and 10 years ago, our narcotics device division kind of inadvertently ended up buying fireworks. It was part of a intended drug buy, which led to discovery of fireworks in a house, and they then kind of shifted to buying that, and resulted in a search warrant that they recovered some significant quantities of that, I think several thousand pounds in total. So those do work, and to be honest, I think to continue our partnership with the DLE Fireworks Task Force, I think is the way ahead. I think number one, the interdiction at the ports is going to be critical, but in the absence of that too, I think, or in addition to that too, is to continue with the sting operations, which we have a narcotics device division. Right now, that's one of their additional tasks is to look into these and again partner with DLE and to use, because our narcotics folks, we have assets as far as plainclothes vehicles and investigative tools that we can use to facilitate these types of investigations. So,
Ms. Cheng, as a public defender, what are your thoughts about sting operations in this context?
We regularly deal with sting operations as a part of many criminal prosecutions, but as on the topic of the fireworks and the avenue for increased enforcement, we read the language of the bill, and as I stated earlier, we actually did not oppose increases for appropriations. I heard testimony, it might have been from Director Lambert or a representative from his department, where they were asking for appropriations for increased drones, to be able to use drones for enforcement. We did not oppose any of that, and I think sometimes the community thinks that the Office of the Public Defender or criminal defense attorneys always side with the quote-unquote criminals. We are mandated to represent people through the criminal process, but we are also sensitive to this issue. And I also just want to encourage the legislature and the city council to be mindful about how we're changing laws to make sure that the laws that you do pass are constitutional and will withstand scrutiny by defense attorneys like us. But for the specific issue of sting operations or other avenues of enforcement, we had no position on that. We understand the need to increase it, and we always maintained our position that we do believe the issue is with enforcement rather than increasing penalties for current offenses that we are not utilizing.
Yeah, Director Lambert, I believe that one of the cases that the chief there is referring to, I mean, the individual, as far as I understand, was selling these on Facebook Marketplace, right? So it's sort of out in the open.
Right.
What kind of impact do you think sting operations could have on this?
Well, the reality is sting operations would be one of many features to correct this. Any type of situation or any type of market, you know, it's really a supply and demand thing, right? So when you talk about sting operations, discouraging people to have them, being afraid to sell or even receive them, those are all avenues to discourage people's want, right? And I think that, you know, to some of the things that we're talking about, you know, that Joni's talking about and everybody's talking about, it really has to be a comprehensive community solution, meaning that it's education-based, right? In regards to the injuries that it can cause, in regards to this is not actually culture. You know, I think people throw out these culture and tradition arguments as a way to be like, don't bug me. I want to be protected under my culture and tradition. But really, it's about public safety and it's really about supply and demand. So it's all these little things that have to come together. I, kind of going back to a previous question, I actually would like to see a complete ban just to create a reset, right? So in other words, you ban it all. It makes it very easy to now find it, because the issue here we have is that because there are legal fireworks that can be brought in, what we have is we have illegal shippers that will put the illegal stuff in the back of the container, right? Knowing that we can't, the law only allows us to search a certain amount of footage, right? So it's all these little things that make it nearly impossible or difficult to really be impactful. So for me, what I would like to see is a complete ban for, let's say, 5 years. Law enforcement could really begin to reset the market, because what our informants have said is that there are some distributors that have 2 years worth. In other words, they've stockpiled enough to supply their funnel for 2 years. So the only way to really do a full reset is to reset the whole market, right? And then we can start to look at having, you know, red fireworks and, you know, the sparkler types being reintroduced over time. So I'd really like to have that discussion, and it would really give law enforcement a great opportunity to really turn it back, because this piecemeal style, it will work, but it'll be much slower.
Interesting.
I want to go back. One thing you said that caught my ear is that there's people with 2 years of stockpile. And we went to a situation in EMS, I think it was about 12 years ago, where people were legally dismantling fireworks in the Waikele bunkers, and there was an explosion, a mishap. And these folks were legally doing this, and they still, I think, lost 3 people in that. And so this is a risk for law enforcement, for the fire department, for EMS. If one of these stored caches goes up in a residential area or anywhere, there's a lot of danger there.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about basically storing bombs in neighborhoods. I want to go back to that video that we shared at the beginning of our broadcast of the explosion on New Year's Eve. Investigators say a lit bundle of about 50 aerial fireworks fell over and then blasted into crates of fully unlit fireworks, causing an even bigger explosion. Basically what Dr. Ireland was just talking about. Now, with this destruction in mind, thinking about the lives lost and the lives forever changed, we asked people in Honolulu if this tragedy will lead to any real change. Do you think anything's going to change after what happened there?
Do you? I don't think so. You know, if people are going to still do what they do because they haven't been caught. Until they get caught, then they'll do something about it. But outside of that, there is not a likely chance that they will, you know. Sad to say, but it's true.
I really hope so that people will realize that even though small or big fireworks, it can still cause injuries to not only for yourself but for others. Yeah, especially the innocent.
No. Unfortunately, there's just too many people that enjoy popping those fireworks.
I'm so cynical. I hope so. I hope so, but I don't know. I would like to believe that change is going to happen. I'm not holding my breath.
So some mixed reviews there. I'm curious on the panel, is anyone here holding their breath? Do you think that there will be meaningful change given that 6 people lost their lives and we saw all of that destruction?
I had a question actually I was going to ask, Director, that's the first time I heard about the idea of like an outright ban for a certain period of time and then introducing things slowly. I actually had never heard that. Do you know of cases where that's worked in certain areas? Because I'm curious to know, has it worked? I always hear outright ban. I've always been one to try and find balance and what can we do with consumer versus, and enforcing the regulating the ones that are already outlawed. But I was curious to know, has that worked somewhere? Have you have examples of that happening?
No, I'm just trying to apply, knowing that we're in an island state and it's limited the way that it can come in, and it's different from drugs because a lot of drugs can be brought in a small package, but fireworks are large. So I do believe that if we were to deploy this full ban strategy, that I think that what it does is it kind of reduces the available market. Whatever storages are on island will start to be depleted. And again, because you can't bring in anything, it's much easier to identify it at the port. Very easy. But right now we have these mixed shipments of, legal, because for example, Maui allows certain types and it passes through.
We're the only county that, I was going to add that on, we're the only county right now that does this. The other counties are able to do the consumer ones that I had mentioned.
Correct. So as they pass through with these legal amounts, like I said, their container, I'm not accusing anyone, but we have had instances where the front half of the container is your legal consumer fireworks. And then what will happen is our informants will say, yeah, but the back half was just loaded with the stuff you guys are looking for.
And the other counties, so I mean, I know we're more heavily populated, but the other counties they don't have the same difficulties that we do. Are they plagued also with these areas that are?
Well, the benefit that the outer islands have is they don't have necessarily the population density pockets. So for example, if you're in rural, areas of Big Island, you're probably not going to piss your neighbors off as much because you live on 3 acres. But when people in Honolulu are living on 3,000 square feet, and they're blowing it up and it's shaking your windows, there's so much different impact. So I think that Honolulu gets a lot of frustration because of the population density, but I do know that the other counties, depending on where you live, people are also frustrated there as well.
Yeah, so given that frustration, Chief, do you think, going back to what we heard from the audience there, from the viewers that we talked to, do you think that anything is going to change?
I'm hopeful. I guess it's difficult to say, but to follow up on the bans, I would tell you that City Council did enact a ban on most consumer fireworks in the island of Oahu. We still do allow firecrackers, but shortly after the enactment of the ban, the number of fireworks-related fires and injuries were soon after were reduced by over 70%. So from a first responder perspective, we're in favor of these bans, because we do statistically see less injuries and less. So I guess that's where the Honolulu Fire Department stance would be. We whatever will enhance the safety of the public, we're really for.
So if I can piggyback on just the thought of hope, right? I think that everybody here, we do what we do because of hope, right? So it's one of those things where for me to say that I don't hope, then I've given up. So for me, do I think that we can make a change? Yes. Do I have hope? Absolutely. It's why I get up every morning. It's why everyone here gets up every morning, is that we want to create a community that's safe. So yeah, I have a lot of hope, and I think there's going to be a lot of changes that need to happen. This law that's occurring is one huge step. And again, there's going to have to be a significant amount of public sentiment that has to change. And there's going to have to be a significant amount of recurring investment in this issue.
Representative Matayoshi, what are your thoughts?
I have a lot of hope this year. I've been fighting this illegal firework thing from my first day in office, and through various plans, stopping it at the ports, just everything, stopping them, the illegal shipping containers. But this is the first year where I've seen the entire legislature kind of come together and say, we got to do something. And the bill that I'm trying to advance is kind of the first time where a high-ranking member of HPD's actually pointed to the bill and said, this bill is the first bill I've seen that will actually make a difference. creating that lower level citation, changing the definition of aerials to make it easier to prosecute. We can't rely on neighbors reporting on neighbors. We can't rely on neighbors being called to testify in court for the prosecutor's office. It's just not going to happen. And you know which crazy neighbors live in your neighborhood. Everybody knows. That's probably the last person you want coming after you in your neighborhood. So allowing HPD to be able to do their job effectively, allowing the prosecutor's office to prosecute effectively without relying on neighbors reporting, I think I see a lot of hope. And again, the feeling around the Capitol around this issue has changed significantly this year compared to all the other years I've been in office.
Yeah, Mark, let's get your thoughts as a prosecutor. What kind of a difference do you expect this to make? There's someone writing in saying, if the level to prove guilt is too high right now, why don't we set high fines for people instead of going for the felony? Keep giving them the fine. So this tiered system that Representative Matayoshi is talking about, do you think it will be effective?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that we're all sitting here right now discussing this, there's hope. I think we all want to address this issue. I think that it comes down to this, right? It's always going to be a cost-benefit analysis for anybody who's doing something illegal, right? If I do this, I'll profit this much if I sell this much. My chances of getting caught is maybe not this much, right? So everybody's doing that right now. I think that we're moving in the right direction. If we're going to make it easier to prosecute, if we're going to increase, I think one of the things I saw in Representative Matayoshi's bill is this habitual user. If they get convicted like within the last 10 years for another one, it's going to up the ante. And so I think these kind of things, it's going to make the cost is going to be a lot higher and the benefit will be a lot less. So I think I'm very hopeful that, like I said, the fact that we're all here discussing this, and I've worked with Mike there for ages, and believe me, we discussed this issue for probably like 8 or I don't know how many years, going back and forth about the definitions. How do we solve this? And back then it was, I would say that frankly it was very not so hopeful, but I think we're really going to the right direction right now.
Joni, I'd love to get your thoughts as well, just about the change in attitude. You shared the story of going to your neighbor and actually confronting them. I think a lot of us would not choose to do that, so you're pretty brave. But there's a lot of folks who are writing in saying that they support you, they agree that this is more like family history than real culture. But do you think there is a shift, on a personal level? What are the conversations that you're having?
So I noticed, I follow trends on the social media. So I noticed this year in particular, even before the fireworks incident, that the tone of the media was, we want it banned. Because what was happening was people were blowing these bombs all over the place. People's dogs were getting out and they're all getting run over. So like a bunch of dogs got killed. And this is heartbreaking and it's costly for the pet owners who've tried to save their dogs. And it became in the forefront, especially in our Kāneʻohe page. And more voices started coming out saying, maybe we need to address this. So I did see a shift in that, where maybe we should not just do the Asian thing and just not say anything. Because normally we don't say anything, we don't report our neighbors, we just say, oh, they're just crazy, But when this year was different, so my folks are older and, things are coming their way, do we just take it still yet? And I felt like, what if I wasn't there at New Year's? Something came over their house and it set their whole shed on fire. And I thought about it. I said, you know what? They're going to hate me, but I don't care. I am there to protect my family, my kids, our pets, and we need to speak up. Even though it's very anti-Asian, I said, I'm going to do it. And that made a difference for that night. It was much more safer after that.
Chief, what about this idea? Because law enforcement can only do so much. I mean, you talked about being overwhelmed, and we see that video, not just of the ʻAiea-Manu incident, but just, you go on the freeway on New Year's Eve, and you just see that the whole sky is lit up. What about this idea of neighbors talking to neighbors? I mean, that can be a risk.
It can be. Of course, we always recommend that we call 911 and let the officers handle the confrontation piece of it. But like Joni was saying, before we started, that she does live in a kind of a rural area. That by the time she felt that it would be quicker for her to just go ahead and talk to those people. And in that case, it did work out. But of course, we do recommend that as much as possible, do get the police involved to because we're better equipped to respond if there is a negative response, that sort of thing. But to her point, and I think things are have escalated to a point where I think attitudes are changing, and even for us, besides just the obvious proliferation of fireworks too, but it does affect us in other ways. I mean, about 5 years ago, if you guys recall, there's the freeway was shut down by Waikele because people just stopped there to watch. And that tied up our traffic assets as well. So like in this past several New Years, we dedicate a large force of our traffic and patrol folks to just watch the and maintain the freeway access as well. So it does impact in various different ways. But we do see I think a change in public perception about just the increase in just the explosiveness of some of these aerials and just how it affects people's lives overall. So hopefully the tide is changing, and especially with the ʻAiea-Pearl incident as well. So
yeah, Dr. Cheng, do you think people are starting to realize just how dangerous these devices are?
Yeah, I think just my mind goes to the idea of the speed of the news cycle. And I'm just so thankful, again, we have a panel here. It's been 4 months, almost 5 months since the incident. And I think I'm very hopeful for what our state leaders are doing, because we just need to continue the conversation. I think it's beyond just even educating from a physician level down to the school level, but I think just even just PBS, the news has a responsibility to kind of recognize that this is a golden opportunity. I think we have people in executive leadership with Governor Green, Mayor Blangiardi, that we've realized I think we've hit the threshold point. You have innocent women dying, you have innocent children dying, you have elderly parents that are at risk here. It just affects the whole spectrum. And yes, my only hope too is as we move through the ledge cycle is that if we can just continue putting a spotlight, and there's different aspects. There's the PTSD aspects, people who have been injured, pets mentioned. I think it's a really important part of our culture here as Hawaii as well. I'm very hopeful.
Okay. There's a question here from Cynthia, and I was hoping, Mark, that you could take this one. Have those responsible for the New Year's incident been arrested, or are they roaming around free? Can you tell us a little bit about the status of that case?
Yeah, she's probably not going to like my answer to this, but it's pending investigation right now, so I can't really talk about it. But what I will say is that we've been working with HPD and with the assistance of DLE as well, just working really hard and trying to put this case together. We have, in my opinion, the top attorney working on this case as well from our side. So it's being very thoroughly investigated right now.
Okay. Director Lambert, there's a couple of questions here about enforcement and resources. And Bob and Eva says, why hasn't the governor activated the National Guard in this type of crisis? Why hasn't Matson stopped shipping these? So there is the private sector, right? The companies that ship these, inadvertently ship these devices. And then also there were a couple of folks in here asking if the National Guard could be activated on New Year's Eve, on days that are specific. I mean, that seems like a pretty heavy lift, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so National Guard, and actually Chief Horikawa is National Guard, so maybe you can go further into that. But typically, you can't use those assets for enforcement because they have their limitations. They could probably support, but in regards to enforcement, that agency would not be able to fulfill the role of the gap that we're having. And we do work with Matson, and again, we just have to remember what everybody's goal is. So Matson's job is to bring things in, right, legal things in, and make sure that they move quickly. So they're definitely working with us, and actually we're engaged in discussions with them in regards to suspicious containers. I don't want to go too deep because that's investigative things that we're working on, but I can say that they understand that a container full of fireworks being brought in would obliterate the port, right? So they understand that they have skin in the game, and it seems like there's some participation definitely from our shippers.
Okay, there's a novel idea here from Russell in Waikiki. Representative Matayoshi, this might be one for you. The answer is not through enforcement, says Russell. He says, utilize the insurance industry, cancel homeowners insurance for people who use illegal fireworks. There are some liability issues if you let this happen on your property, are there not?
Yeah, there are certainly liability issues, and I think if the insurance company knew you were storing illegal fireworks on your property, they would act, but they're not going to find out until it's too late or until the enforcement action is already against the individual. So I'm not too sure if insurance is the right way to go here. Again, I do want us to take proactive approaches. I do want us to do more sting operations, try to stop it at the ports, but I don't think that homeowners insurance is the right mechanism to deter this.
And if I may, we already do have forfeiture laws with respect to this as well. So they might not get insurance or may have it, but they can also get their homes taken away right now, as it is in the law.
So what? Oh.
Okay.
So one interesting thing that also about the bill that we're trying to pass is it makes someone more liable if a firework is shot off on their property, whether they know about it or not. If they're negligently, recklessly, intentionally allowing someone else to fire off fireworks on their property, then the homeowner or the renter can be liable for that as well. So we're trying to make people more responsible for their own properties as well. And I'm talking with the mayor's office right now about doing, again, a drone program to try to detect what properties they're being fired off on. Because even if we don't see even if we can't identify the person firing it off, if it's fired off on that property, we can possibly go after the renter or the homeowner that owns that property or is responsible for that property to get them more directly as well.
Yeah, Hayley, what are your thoughts on that idea that even if you didn't know that you have a party, some people come over, a friend of a friend, they light that, and then now you're liable. I mean, how difficult or easy would that be to defend?
Well, I think what we're hearing is, again, the desire to increase and criminalize as much activity or conduct as possible. To answer the specific question about how it would be to defend something like that, one of the things is it still does require some culpability or some state of mind of the homeowner. It's not a strict liability proposition that the bill has, meaning that regardless of any knowledge, the homeowner would then be criminally responsible. It has to, as you heard, negligently, which is a fairly low standard, but intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly. So there is still some connection to the homeowner, although the liability is definitely more expansive than it is under the current laws.
Okay, I want to get to drones and go to you, Director Lambert. There's a couple of people who say, can we use drones? You can catch them in the act. So this is basically what Representative Matayoshi was sharing. And someone else writing in, some drones can record GPS coordinates. Can Director Lambert make use of drones to get the evidence needed to prosecute those setting off the illegal fireworks?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, back to my earlier discussion, right? We don't have the human aspect, but we definitely have capability for drones. So when you take all of these ideas, right, with REP allowing for this new law, and actually all our legislators that are supporting it, where we could flag a property, right, and say that we feel that this property is responsible for illegal fireworks or aerials, whatnot. I didn't speak to the council member, so I didn't want to say their name, but I actually pitched it to the mayor and I pitched it to a council member that what we should impose, because when you're asking for insurance, now you're asking for a private entity to go ahead and take action, is that what I'm going to be asking the counties to consider as a hazardous property tax, meaning that if we are able to show that this property is allowing these illegal activities to occur, that the city would then be able to impose a additional property tax fee. Because what it is that properties that use fireworks and do stuff, they're more likely to need ambulance, they're more likely to create a fire risk for that community, and they definitely will absorb police services. So if you want to do all of that stuff, then okay, fine. If you're convicted, or if we're able to prove through civil process that you're a hazardous property, that we could have a X amount of increase for a certain amount of years. Because that's really what you would discourage people to not want to have the party at their house. Like, in other words, right? Like, well, not this year, guys, because, and what happens is that you limit where people want to have it, right? And it's one of those things where we have to attack it from a civil aspect, because again, when we go criminal is good for certain things, but really what discourages people is money, right? And that's really what this is about.
Councilmember Okimoto, I'm curious what you think about that. Is a pretty novel idea.
No, I know. I'm so excited. I'm interested in all the things that Director Lambert's saying tonight. It's the first time I've heard this. I wasn't the council member that you spoke with. But first of all, I want to go back to something that Battalion Chief Hwang mentioned, and I think I thank you for giving the stats, but maybe in the beginning the occurrences of fireworks lessened, but obviously that hasn't been the case up until now. So again, I'm trying to find the balance. I am interested. I generally don't like to have taxation of people, but I don't know. I was curious to know if is that something that we could actually do legally? I don't know. This is the first time I'm hearing it, so I would like to hear the discussion further. I think that I like to hear that Rep. Matayoshi is doing his bill, because then we're trying to address what can we do to kind of nip that in the bud. But I am going to continue to advocate for, I know that you disagree, but the ban has not worked, and I don't know how else to express this. And maybe initially fire department saw a drop, but that's not the case right now. So I am going to still continue to advocate. What can we do to find that balance? What can we do to regulate stable, safe, and sound consumer fireworks that are going to be ones that are not going to be harmful? Anything, I mean, really using a knife in the kitchen could be harmful. We can't stop accidents from happening. But I would like to see what can we do. I think that if we regulate things better, we would have less of the black market. I think that we wouldn't see these aerials going off insanely like we do every year. I think that we could then it would generate income for our city and for our state. There's other ways that we can address the fireworks. I know not everybody they might not think that's a popular suggestion, but I don't think that the outright ban has worked. I don't think it's going to continue to work, and we have it in place. What can we do to address what we have? But I would like to have that conversation farther, Director, because that's the first time I've heard that. Thank you.
There's also this idea of just, Director Lambert, you talked about how people respond to money, and it's amazing to think about just how much money is being spent on these fireworks. I'd love for anyone on the panel to share some statistic. When I interviewed that gentleman that you heard from at the beginning of the broadcast, he told me that he spends about $2,000 a year on fireworks. How much do these things cost, Representative Matayoshi or Director Lambert?
And this is all just general numbers, but typically to load up a container is, somewhere between $200,000 to $250,000 to load. And then the street value is over $1 million, right? So that's where with these $5,000 fines, it just doesn't go far enough. $10,000 with a B felony, that's a start. But we really have to start to look at ways to discourage the monetary rewards for getting away with it, right? So some of the things that I just pitched to Rep tonight is, maybe next session we look at transferring the cost of destruction onto the person that brings it in, because right now, for us to destroy a container, we really don't have the capability here on island. So there's a contractor, on the continent that'll do it for $1 million per container. So I just feel that it's unfair that why should the taxpayer have to flip the bill for somebody that was trying to make illegal money off this community? It's like, okay, you want to bring it in, you get caught, up to $1 million to destroy it, you flip that bill. What that does is now an illegal shipper would have to make sure that they get 4 full containers in for every 1 container they get caught, right? Now it starts to discourage that risk reward, like what Mark talked about. Right now, if I send 2 containers and 1 gets through, I'm winning, right? Just simple math.
Okay, there's a comment
Great idea,
here.
by the way.
There's a comment here, Joni, I would love your thoughts on this. Imagine if all the money people spend on fireworks was donated to the community parks and rec, or the kids' playground equipment, or hiking trails. This is from Matthew. I mean, you think about all these resources just going up in smoke in an evening.
So I think that's where we don't, the people who are blowing the fireworks, spending all this money, no more community values. They just think, this is my party, I want to blow it up, this is my fun. Who cares if the neighbor wakes up? They don't think like that, and that's an unfortunate conversation that we, I think, as a greater community, need to talk about. You can't spend all the, people don't volunteer for things, people don't give back, people don't help. We're not cohesive as a community, and I would love to see our leaders come back into the community and show how to give back and be that example. But right now we don't have that. And I think that's why it's all me, 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 very self-centered. And that's why me, my fireworks, me, my space, who cares about anybody else? And that's very, very unfortunate. I see that every day. I do a volunteer crosswalk. Hold my sign every day for an hour. And when we first did it, people were just don't care. We have kids walking there. They're going 40, 50 miles an hour sometimes in a residential zone. But now, we put the sign, we tell them slow down, and now people are starting to care, and they're starting to understand. But, that's a whole process that took 3 years for people to understand that we want our kids safe.
Yeah, I think we need more Jonis in our neighborhood. I think we all.
I get so mad.
Dr. Ireland, you know, your whole agency, it's full of people who do nothing but care for community. It's just the opposite of what she's talking about. I mean, I just wonder what you think about that, all these resources going up in smoke, and thinking about, you know, EMS has a limited number of rigs. There are only so many first responders, and they're called to all of these incidents again and again, and putting themselves at risk. So when you think about that, you know, what goes through your mind?
It's such a great team we have, and I'm blessed to work with all of them. They work hard every day, but that night is just really off the charts. But I do think people's behavior has already changed. And the reason I think that, maybe temporarily, but the reason I think that is, think on New Year's Eve. On the 3 or 4 days before, there's people popping already and things blowing up. And the 3 or 4 days after, especially the weekend following New Year's Eve. And at least where I live, in the area I live, it was very, very quiet on the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd. And so I think people were reflecting on what happened New Year's Eve when they got the news New Year's Day. And I don't know about everybody else, but for my neighborhood, which is usually very, very robust with illegal aerials, was pretty quiet.
Chief, did you see that in the responses that you had to do in the days after? Do you think there was a little bit of hesitation or maybe reflectiveness that Dr. Ireland's talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really, that's why I appreciate this venues it brings to light the dangers that is possible from all these illegal fireworks. On New Year's Eve, typically call volumes go up by 60%. You just got to think to yourself, now if your grandmother's really needs help or there's an auto accident, the resources are tied up in some dumpster fire. So it really strains the first responder resources. So not only that, I have to say there was a paradigm shift just in my friends that went to the call that night. They pretty much said, I don't think I'm going to take my kids out for a walk during New Year's Eve after seeing the destruction. So I think this is I think law enforcement, fire department, we're all working together. We're creating PSAs. We're going to create our educational materials. We're going to advocate for safety, life safety. But this is a community effort.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Very much a community effort. So I appreciate the community coming and actually, if we ignore and dismiss the illegal fireworks and say, I'm not going to say nothing, it's going to be difficult. So I am hopeful that with this outreach that maybe as a community we can get together and improve. Yeah.
Representative Matayoshi, I want to key into something that the chief was just saying, this idea that, you know, people don't necessarily want to take their kids down the street. I know that you have 2 young children as well. What are you hearing from your constituent and just, you know, your reflections as a dad about taking your kids to a party? I mean, I had that same thought. It's like, oh, maybe next year we don't go.
No, it's frightening, honestly. I think that was the scariest thing, honestly, as a parent, watching that disaster happen on New Year's Eve and thinking that could have been my house right next to it. That really scared us. And I know there's a house 1 street back that's been firing off those big concussive bombs. They've got aerials, they've got kind of everything. And occasionally one will misfire and explode maybe 20 feet above the ground and really shake the neighborhood. After this incident happened, it made me really think about that house and what kind of destruction it could do to my kids who are just sleeping in their beds, to me and my wife who are just sleeping in our home, not doing anything wrong, but in danger because of other people's actions. It's a scary thing. So parties, going out on the street, I mean, these should be things that aren't a risk to you and your family, but I think we saw in the community kind of a shift to, honestly, fear that doing ordinary things now could run the risk of injury or death.
My 3-year-old died that night, or the next day, or right after. My 3-year-old was killed, and there are other kids that night injured, completely innocent. And that's very, very sad. The other thing is, I think it's worth noting, the folks that were in the hospital, they were just discharged a few weeks ago. And look how far we are from New Year's Eve. And I don't have firsthand knowledge of this, but I don't even think the folks from Arizona are back yet. I think they're discharged from the hospital, but I think they're still in rehab. It was months before probably a dozen of the patients even got out of the hospital that were so critically injured that night.
Yeah, Dr. Cheng, I mean, we're talking about a lifetime of recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just reflecting on the family portion too, and just the perspective. Like my wife's not from Hawaii, and where she grew up, and she's in orthopedics. So she has worked many New Year's nights, and you spend up to 8 to 10 hours like for a hand surgeon, right? And as Dr. Ireland mentioned, there's typically 5 to 6 per and that's just for Queens Medical Center. And I think just these, again, the general idea is, I think for a lot of people here, it sounds like I grew up in Hawaii, is that it sometimes will take a little bit of an outside perspective to provide a little bit of realization that I almost kind of put it on the little bit of the level of gun violence. And today there was a horrible tragedy in Florida, and we've been fairly, I think, fortunate. I think it's part of the fact that we have a very strong community here in Hawaii. But I would probably put this kind of almost like madness obsession with fireworks, that's our, if anything, kind of our social challenge in Hawaii. I think that's it right there. So yeah, I think we've spoken enough about the long-term morbidity, just the long-term disability that people have. And I guess one of the last points I'll just make is, I hope is that with this experience, it unlifts a little bit of the taboo. I think it's such a strong part of Hawaii culture that I think most of us in the room have known someone that's had a injury somehow related to that. But it's almost, we don't talk about it because we don't want to ruin the fun or make it be a downer or something that's so fun or just has some positive aspect about it. But in reality, it's just, there's just so much tragedy enveloped in this culture, and it doesn't have to be that way. I think there is a possible way to enjoy it in a safe way, but I think we just have to come back to some common sense practice.
And if I could, Yunji, I want to say, I wish I had a Joni in my neighborhood too. And I'm a parent as well, so I think I had the same thoughts that Representative Matayoshi did. In walking the community in one of my door-to-doors, I met a lady who was a pet owner, and she said, I don't have issues with fireworks. This is probably 2 years ago or so. She said she had issues with people not respecting other people, like doing it out of the hours, before or after. So I think our community, we want to work together, and I would just put a plug out there to all of our neighbors, all of us. Like we want to respect each other's, whether it's culture or traditions. We want to respect that, and we want everybody to enjoy it, but do it safely and do it in the time frame that we're allowed, with the materials that we're allowed to, not the illegals. We're not advocating for that. And I think if more people would think like that and have Joni, that kind of mindset, then we wouldn't have people being disrespectful and then leading to danger that could harm people's lives.
Yeah, Hayley, I'm curious to get your thoughts. Why do you think there is this disconnect? Because we are so community-minded in Hawaii. We pride ourselves. Aloha, the spirit of aloha is in our state constitution, and yet, we see this activity that totally disregards community. So why do you think there is that difference?
Well, I think, I hear what everyone is saying, and I tend to share a lot of the views, but I think that mindset, when you say that why are we, disconnecting or kind of disregarding, I think that's a relatively recent perspective, and I think that's kind of come about in the wake of the tragedy. I think for many years, and we have all known, fireworks has been a community issue for a very long time. One that the legislature has actually been focused on since, I think, the creation of the task force, first task force back in 2011. Then they did an updated report to the task force in 2019. So this has been a community issue for years in terms of safety and legislation, but I don't think the members of our community have believed that engagement with fireworks or something that's been such a huge part of our tradition and culture and our celebration here was seen as a method of disrespecting your neighbor. I think now the safety issue has become much more, spotlighted in the wake of the tragedy, and I think maybe that's what we're all talking about, is that maybe the conversation can progress in that regard because of, I think, a new sense of awareness given what happened.
Yeah, Mark, what are your thoughts on this?
I don't know. It's just, to me, changing people. I mean, I really agree with Joni. I mean, I'm the oldest person here, so I can say this. But when I grew up, people who had the Roman candle, we didn't have the kind of stuff we have now. But some people have Roman candles, and that would land on people's roofs and stuff like that. But back then, it wasn't at all like this. So when they talk about cultural stuff, I have a hard time really understanding that, because when you talk about culture, you're talking about usually you talk about hundreds of years ago, people did this. Hundreds of years ago, the Native Americans did this. Hundreds of years ago, the Chinese did this or whatever. But it's only been like the last 30 years or so, and I don't know if that's really cultural. So I really have, I think, like Hayley said, I think this tragedy will have, people will become aware of it. And I really hope that people will realize that it's not a cultural thing. Like I said, I have a really hard time really buying that cultural argument because I really don't think it is.
Yeah.
I want to add to that too, because in the elementary schools nowadays, we're talking about all these values. So they got all these shirts saying aloha, and they put out all the values. The odd thing is that they talk about it every day in school, but then there's still kids that don't display that behavior. And we're not, addressing some of those kids. Like when I do the crossword, there's kids that do naughty things there. And do I choose just to let them do it? But they can harm other people. So I tell them, I said, hey, we don't do that. If you're going to do that, you go over there. But just changing that has really changed the whole atmosphere. And I said, remember, we talk about aloha values and what each one means, and we need to embody that. And we as adults need to embody it and tell those kids that's not right.
And I think that the thing is, it's this other side, and you addressed this earlier, of not wanting to sort of stick out or not wanting to make trouble or not wanting to insult anybody. Chief, how do we find our voice?
Our voice.
Yeah, I mean, how do we embody the spirit that Joni is bringing to us, whether it's organizing a community event or being at the crosswalk or going up and knocking on the neighbor's door? I mean, how do we empower community to actually engage in that way, do you think?
Right. I mean, I think it is a issue of community values, I think it's really shifted as far as the perception of fireworks, what's acceptable, really shifted after the, from the ban in 2011 to what it is now, from fireworks to aerials. But I do agree, like our earlier discussion about how I think, perception, especially with this recent tragedy, I think it's kind of reached almost like a tipping point where I think more people are more apt to agree that, okay, the aerials are just not acceptable here. I think so. I think we're moving in that direction. I think we need to keep this momentum, definitely. And I think it goes with education. I mean, we saw Mr. Lee from the earlier video there. I mean, it's a kupuna. I mean, thank you for being honest on this, but he's a kupuna with those kind of attitudes that, that he gets high off of loud explosions, and he's teaching his grandkids how to do this. So it is a generational or like learning thing that needs to shift. And I think, unfortunately, it took a tragedy to I think maybe be the stimulus to make that happen. So I think with education, working with the community, with the schools, I think we can probably achieve some of that.
We have less than a minute left, but I want to give Dr. Ireland the last word tonight, since you were the one, one of many who responded. Just a final thought for our audience about what you want them to know about that evening and why things should change.
Just you can hurt other people, and you may be doing this behavior and hurt neighbors and other children. But again, I'm so proud of the team that was there that night, from all the agencies and the hard work that they did to save as many lives as they could. And I'm just grateful to work with everybody here in different levels of government, some of the nonprofits that are looking at ways to make a difference, because this is obviously very, very important.
Okay, thank you so much. Mahalo to all of our guests tonight, and for you at home for being part of tonight's town hall. We appreciate all those comments and questions. KΑKOU will be taking some time off, but our public affairs programming does continue with our weekly episodes of Insights right here every Thursday evening. I'm Yunji de Nies. Until next time, good night and aloha.
This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Local broadcasts of KΑKOU are made possible by the support of viewers like you. Mahalo. And by Young Brothers, providing quality service you can count on, connecting our island communities for over 120 years as the state's leading inter-island freight transportation company.
In the fourth year of Changing Planet, we are focusing on two of the largest river restoration projects ever attempted.
What?
One urban.
The River Seine is undergoing a colossal detour.